My name is Sienna Hale. I was 36 years old when my sister pushed me backward through the glass door in our parents' kitchen. Vanessa stood between me and the exit with both hands raised, her face stripped of the polished calm she showed clients and neighbors. "Give me the folder." I held the blue accordion folder against my chest. Inside were bank statements and a document carrying our father's name, records Vanessa did not want anyone outside the family to examine. No. Behind her, our mother stared at me as though I were the person making the evening dangerous. "Sienna, don't leave like this," she said. "We can settle it privately." That was what our family called peace. The moment after Vanessa caused a crisis, but before anyone required her to answer for it. I looked past my sister at the old patio door. Its aluminum frame had stuck for years, especially when the air was damp. Beyond the glass, the flagstone patio was dark with evening rain. "There's nothing left to settle," I said. "Her access ends tonight. The bank can review the rest." Vanessa reached for the folder. I stepped away and pulled it beyond her grasp. "You think you can walk in here, accuse me, and leave?" "I'm not accusing you. I'm showing you the records." I turned toward the door. Vanessa moved faster than I expected. One moment I was reaching for the handle. The next, both of her palms struck high against my back and shoulder. The glass flexed behind me. Then it broke. The sound was not one clean crash. It was a violent series of cracks around my body as the panel gave way. Cold air hit my face. The metal frame caught my right shoulder, and glass opened the skin along my arm as I fell through the doorway. For a fraction of a second, I saw the kitchen from outside. Vanessa frozen beside the empty frame, my mother several feet behind her, and my niece Ella in the adjoining hallway with one hand over her mouth. Then the back right side of my head struck the edge of the flagstone step. There was no dramatic thought, no instant understanding that my life had changed. There was a white burst behind my eyes, a pressure deeper than pain, and the sensation of rain against my cheek. Somewhere above me, Ella screamed my name. Then everything disappeared. I have no memory of the ambulance, the emergency scan, or the neurosurgeon opening my skull to remove the blood pressing against my brain. Those details came later from medical records and from the people who were allowed to remain near me. The impact had caused an acute subdural hematoma, a cerebral contusion, swelling, and a small skull fracture. Doctors kept me sedated for the first 72 hours while they controlled the pressure. When they withdrew the medication, I still did not wake up. One day passed, then another. For 8 more days, I showed no purposeful response. While I lay there unable to speak, other people began speaking for me. On the 11th day, sound returned before meaning did. A machine pulsed somewhere near my head. Rubber soles moved across the floor. Someone was breathing close enough for me to hear the uneven pauses between each breath. Opening my eyes felt like lifting something heavy from underneath it. The room arrived in pieces, a pale ceiling, a curtain, a silver rail, a patch of afternoon light. Then a face moved into view. It was Ella. Vanessa's 20-year-old daughter was sitting beside my hospital bed with shadows beneath her eyes and both hands locked around mine. She was the first person I consciously recognized. Not my mother, not my father, and not the sister whose hands I remembered only as a flash of movement before the glass broke. I tried to say Ella's name, but my mouth produced little more than air. Panic tightened my chest. I did not know where I was, why I could not move normally, or how long I had been gone. Ella leaned closer. "You're safe," she said. "Don't try to talk yet." Her voice shook. She looked toward the door before returning her eyes to mine. I told them what I saw. I could not ask who she meant by them. I could not ask why she looked frightened to be found at my bedside. I could not ask why my parents were absent, or why Vanessa's own daughter appeared to be the only member of my family who had been waiting for me to open my eyes. But even through the fog in my mind, I understood one thing. Ella was not there because the family had remained united. She was there because something had happened while I was unconscious, and she had chosen a side no one expected her to choose. Before I take you back to the beginning, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and like this video. If you believe the truth still matters, when family pressure demands silence, you are part of the community this story is for. To understand why seeing Ella changed everything, you have to understand what loyalty meant in the Hale family long before the glass broke. Vanessa was 4 years older than I was. She had always been the daughter people noticed first. She was lively, quick with names, and skilled at making every gathering feel as though it depended on her presence. By adulthood, she owned a boutique event planning business and knew how to turn polished rooms, expensive flowers, and confident conversation into proof that she was doing well. I worked as a senior payroll systems analyst for a regional healthcare network. My job was quieter. I found discrepancies, corrected records, and made sure people received what they were owed. At work, accuracy was valued. Inside my family, it usually meant I was asked to repair problems without embarrassing the person who had created them. Our mother, Marianne, described Vanessa as passionate and me as capable. The words sounded equally affectionate until I understood what they required. Vanessa was allowed to become overwhelmed. I was expected to remain useful. That difference followed us into every adult problem. When Vanessa needed help, my mother began by explaining the pressure she was under. When I hesitated to provide that help, the discussion shifted to my attitude. I became difficult for noticing a pattern, cold for asking a practical question, and selfish if my solution required Vanessa to admit what she had done. Most of the time, I surrendered before anyone had to say the rule aloud. I handled the paperwork, paid attention to the detail everyone else avoided, and accepted relief as a substitute for gratitude. I told myself that choosing peace made me mature. I did not ask why peace always required the same person to absorb the cost. Our father, Douglas, was gentler than our mother, but rarely challenged her version of a conflict. He had spent decades supervising postal operations and could solve practical problems without raising his voice. At home, however, avoiding an argument often mattered more to him than deciding who had been harmed. Ella noticed that pattern before she had language for it. She was Vanessa's only child, and I had never tried to turn her against her mother. I helped with school applications, listened when she talked about nursing, and answered questions without telling her what she was supposed to feel. Ella had learned to watch adults carefully. When Vanessa became upset, Ella softened her voice. When Marianne declared a problem resolved, Ella stopped asking questions. But with me, she did not have to pretend she had missed what happened in front of her. 18 months before Vanessa pushed me, our father needed cardiac surgery. The operation was planned, but his recovery left him tired and dependent on other people for tasks he had always managed himself. Vanessa lived closest to our parents, so she offered to handle the online household bills while he recovered. Douglas gave her legitimate access to the bill-paying account. At the time, no one treated that decision as dangerous. Why would we? Vanessa was his daughter. She brought groceries, drove him to follow-up appointments, and sat beside our mother in waiting rooms. Her help was real. That made it easier for everyone to assume her judgment would remain inside the limits of the permission she had been given. My role was different. I updated medication lists, checked insurance statements, and returned to my own apartment after each task was complete. Whenever I asked whether they needed me to review the household accounts, my mother said Vanessa had everything under control. For more than a year, I accepted that answer. Then, several weeks before the night at the glass door, my father received a past due property tax notice. He called me after dinner. His voice was low, as though the envelope itself had embarrassed him. "Sienna, I thought this was already paid," he said. "Can you look at it?" "Of course," I said. I gave him the answer my family had trained me to give before I knew the size of the problem. The next evening, I sat at my parents' kitchen table with the notice between us. Douglas had placed it inside its original envelope and smoothed both pieces flat. The careful presentation told me how unsettled he was. He had spent his working life tracking routes, deadlines, and missing items. An official notice for something he believed had been handled felt like a personal failure. Marianne stood at the counter, making tea. "It's probably a processing delay," she said. "Vanessa set everything up correctly." "Did you confirm the payment left the account?" I asked. She looked at me over her shoulder. "Your father asked you to check a notice, not audit your sister." I had not mentioned Vanessa. Douglas noticed that too. He lowered his eyes to the envelope. "I just want to know whether I missed something," he said. That was the family pattern in its simplest form. A problem appeared. I was asked to resolve it. The moment my work might reveal something uncomfortable about Vanessa, the request changed. Accuracy became suspicion. A question became an accusation. Ella was at the far end of the table with a nursing textbook open in front of her. She did not interrupt, but I saw her look from her grandmother to me. She had become skilled at recognizing when the stated subject of a conversation was not the real one. After my parents went into the living room, she stayed behind to gather her notes. "Are you worried?" she asked. "Not yet. Grandma is." I glanced toward the doorway. Marianne was speaking to Douglas in the lowered voice she used when she wanted privacy without closing a door. "A notice can be a mistake," I said. Ella nodded, but neither of us believed that was what she had meant. Vanessa's event business had been under strain for months. At family dinners, she described two former corporate clients as indecisive and disloyal. Marianne repeated those explanations as if repeating them made the losses temporary. Vanessa still arrived well-dressed and spoke about upcoming projects, but she had begun canceling smaller plans and asking our mother to cover expenses she once paid without discussion. None of that proved she had touched our parents' money. It only explained why my mother had become defensive before I opened a single account. Douglas gave me permission to review the bill-paying records with him. We agreed to do it the following Saturday, when he felt rested enough to sit at the computer. I did not ask Vanessa for her version first. The account belonged to our parents, and my father had the right to understand it before anyone else shaped the explanation. As I was leaving, Marianne followed me to the front door. "Vanessa has done a great deal for us," she said. "I know. Your father was helpless after surgery. She kept this house functioning. Then the records will show that." My mother's mouth tightened. "You always make everything sound so cold." I drove home with that sentence following me. At work, checking a discrepancy was an act of care. It prevented small errors from becoming missed wages, penalties, or lost coverage. Inside my family, care was measured differently. Caring meant trusting the person Marianne wanted protected. Asking for evidence meant I had already failed the test. For the first time, I decided I would rather appear cold than leave my father dependent on an explanation no one had verified. Douglas and I began with the property tax account. The payment had not been delayed by the county. It had never been made. The checking balance had dropped below the amount required several days before the due date. My father stared at the screen and asked how that could have happened. His pension deposit was regular. The household expenses had not changed enough to explain the shortage. I expanded the transaction history. The first transfer looked ordinary because the description contained Vanessa's name. She had access to move money for household purchases, and Douglas remembered reimbursing her occasionally. But the amount did not match any expense he recognized. Then I found another transfer, and another. Some went to Vanessa's business account, others went to her personal account. The amounts varied enough to avoid looking like a scheduled payment, but the pattern became obvious when I placed the dates together. I downloaded 14 months of statements and built a simple list. The total was $38,600. Douglas read the number twice. "That can't be right." I checked it twice. "Maybe those were bills. Then we need the invoices." He leaned back from the computer. Color had drained from his face. "I never told her she could take that." Marianne entered when she heard his voice. I turned the screen so she could see the transaction list. She did not look surprised by the first transfer. That mattered. "What do you know about it?" I asked. My mother folded her arms. "Vanessa needed temporary help after she lost a client. We agreed to lend her $8,000. Douglas turned toward her. "You agreed. You were still recovering. I knew nothing about it. You would have said yes." Marianne spoke as though permission could be created afterward by predicting the answer she preferred. I pointed to the remaining transactions. "Did you know about these?" Her confidence faded. "Not all of them." "How many?" "I don't know." "The first 8,000, Douglas said. "Did you know about anything after that?" She did not answer. I continued reviewing the account profile with my father's permission. The payment settings showed that Vanessa still had active credentials. A saved document folder on the family computer contained a partially completed application for a new line of credit in Douglas's name. The requested amount was $15,000. It had not been submitted. No loan had been opened and no money had been released, but most of the identifying information had already been entered. Douglas stood so quickly, his chair struck the wall. "Remove her." Marianne stepped between him and the computer. "We need to speak to her first." "We will," I said, "but the access should be frozen now. If you lock her out without warning, she'll think we believe she stole from us." I looked at the transfers on the screen. "What do you call taking money beyond the permission she was given?" My mother flinched as if I had insulted her. "I call it a family matter." Douglas did not let us change the credentials that afternoon. He wanted one conversation first, and I could see how much it cost him to oppose Marianne even that far. I agreed to wait until the meeting, but I downloaded the records and printed copies. I also printed the incomplete credit application. At home, I organized everything inside my blue accordion folder. For years, that folder had carried insurance claims, tax forms, and corrected bills for other members of my family. Holding it usually meant I was about to solve something quietly. This time, I was preparing to make sure the problem could not disappear inside another explanation. I sent one message to Vanessa, Marianne, and Douglas. I said we needed to review the transfers and the unfinished application together. I did not accuse Vanessa of fraud. I did not threaten the police. I said only that account access had to be addressed and the records had to be explained. Vanessa called immediately. "You went through Dad's accounts?" "He asked me to." "You had no right to download my transfers. They came from his account. Mom knew I needed help." She knew about $8,000. Silence replaced her anger for a moment. Then she asked who else had seen the statements. That question told me more than her denial. "Only Dad, Mom, and me," I said. "We're meeting tomorrow evening. Ella does not need to be involved. I haven't involved her. Keep it that way." When I arrived the next night, Ella was already at the house, studying in the small room beside the kitchen. She lived with Vanessa, but our parents' home was quieter, and she often used it before exams. I told her the adults needed privacy. She gathered her books and moved toward the living room. I believed that put her safely outside the conversation. Vanessa arrived 10 minutes later. She looked at the blue folder in my hands before she looked at our parents. "Let's get this over with," she said. I opened the folder on the kitchen table. I placed the transaction summary in front of Vanessa. She scanned the first page and pushed it back. "These were loans. Dad didn't authorize them," I said. "Mom did." Douglas sat across from her with both hands flat on the table. "Your mother did not have permission to give away money from my account." "I didn't give it away," Marianne said quickly. "I helped our daughter through a temporary problem." Vanessa turned to her. "Exactly. $8,000, I said. "What about the remaining $30,600? Vanessa's eyes returned to me. "I moved money when I needed it. Mom knew the business would repay everything." Marianne looked down. "Did you know?" Douglas asked her. "I knew Vanessa was struggling. That isn't what I asked." My mother's eyes filled with tears. I had watched that change end many arguments. The subject stopped being what Vanessa had done and became how cruelly someone had spoken to Marianne. This time, Douglas waited. "No," she said at last. I didn't know the total. I removed the incomplete credit application from the folder. Vanessa did not touch it. Why is there a $15,000 application in Dad's name? It was an option. For whom? The business had a payment due. I started looking at ways to manage it. Douglas stared at her. My name is not one of your options. Vanessa's face tightened. I never submitted it. Because Sienna found it, he said. Marianne picked up the transfer summary and held it as though the paper itself were the threat. We can fix this without destroying anyone, she said. Vanessa can sign a repayment plan. We can describe the earlier money as gifts so no one misunderstands. It wasn't a gift, Douglas said. Then a family loan. She looked at me. You can prepare something. That is what you do. The request was so familiar that part of me reached for it automatically. I could draft a clean agreement, adjust the language, and give everyone a document that made the previous 14 months look intentional. Then I imagined the next overdue notice, the next application, the next moment when my father asked how something bearing his name had happened without him. No, I said. Vanessa laughed once, without humor. Of course, you finally get a chance to prove you're better than me. This isn't about being better. You built a spreadsheet of every time I needed help. I totaled transfers from Dad's account. Same thing to you. I closed the folder. Your access needs to be revoked tonight. Dad should notify the bank and request an independent review. Marianne stood. Absolutely not. The account is his. This is our family. Douglas rubbed one hand across his chest, a gesture left over from the months after surgery. He looked exhausted. I need a minute, he said. He left the kitchen and sat in the living room, close enough to hear our voices, but no longer able to see the rear door. I did not follow him. There was nothing else I could prove by continuing. I'm leaving, I said. I'll call Dad tomorrow and help secure the accounts. Vanessa reached across the table for the folder. I pulled it back. Those are my transfers. They're Dad's statements. Give them to me. No. I stepped away from the table and turned toward the patio door. What happened next had already been waiting at the beginning of this story. Vanessa blocked the exit. Both hands struck me after I had turned away, and the old glass gave way behind my body. But from inside the chronology, there were facts I could not have seen from the ground. Ella had not reached the living room. She had stopped in the adjoining hallway when our voices rose. From there, she saw Vanessa attempt to take the folder. She saw me turn away. She saw her mother follow and shove me once with both hands. Marianne saw it too. Douglas did not. The 911 recording captured the first account before anyone had time to negotiate one. Ella's voice was high and uneven, but the words were clear. My mother pushed my aunt through a glass door. She hit her head. She isn't waking up. The dispatcher told her not to move me and asked whether the person who pushed me was still present. Yes, Ella said. She's standing right here. Vanessa had frozen beside the broken frame. She did not call for an ambulance. According to Ella, she looked from my body to the folder lying among the glass and said that I had come at her. Ella told the dispatcher that was not true. Marianne went outside with a towel and pressed it against the cut on my arm. When the first paramedics arrived, she said the sisters had been arguing and I had gone backward through the door. She did not say Vanessa had pushed me. Douglas entered the kitchen after hearing the crash and found Vanessa crying, Ella on the phone, and me unconscious on the patio. He asked what had happened. Marianne told him it had been an accident during an argument. By the time police separated everyone, he had begun repeating her description as though he had seen it himself. None of those facts came from imagination. I later heard the call, read the body camera summaries, and compared each statement with the scene photographs. The blue folder remained on the patio with blood and glass across its exterior. The pages inside were still legible. They showed why the meeting happened and why I had been trying to leave. Paramedics stabilized my neck, controlled the bleeding from my shoulder and arm, and transported me to the regional trauma center. A scan showed blood collecting beneath the right side of my skull and pressure-shifting structures inside my brain. There was no time to wait for my family to agree on a story. The neurosurgical team took me into the operating room while a detective began collecting 3 different versions of how I reached the ground. The operation removed the acute subdural hematoma and gave my swollen brain room to recover. The fracture along the back right side of my skull did not require separate repair, but the contusion and pressure made the first days uncertain. Doctors kept me sedated for 72 hours. That part of my unconsciousness was intentional. What followed was not. When the medication cleared, I did not open my eyes, follow commands, or respond purposefully. My body maintained basic functions with medical support, but there was no reliable sign that I understood anyone around me. My family initially assumed my parents would control the decisions. 2 years earlier, I had completed ordinary advance planning documents through an employee legal benefits program. I was unmarried, and I did not want an emergency to force my parents into decisions they might disagree about. I named my closest friend, Mara Ortiz, as my healthcare power of attorney. At the time, Marianne had called the choice unnecessarily formal. After the assault, that formality protected me. Mara arrived at the hospital with the signed document and her identification. She did not become a doctor, detective, or judge. She did exactly what I had authorized her to do, received medical information, asked what I would likely want, and kept people accused of harming or pressuring me away from my bed. Vanessa was excluded because police identified her as the alleged assailant. Marianne and Douglas were temporarily restricted after investigators learned their statements conflicted and that Marianne had been communicating with Ella about what she should say. Mara later told me my mother reacted as though the restriction were an insult. "I'm her mother," Marianne said. "And Sienna chose me for this," Mara answered. Mara did not enjoy saying it. That distinction mattered. She did not use my incapacity to win an old argument or punish my family. She used the authority only as long as I could not make decisions for myself. Outside the hospital, the detective compared the first accounts. Ella said she saw Vanessa follow me toward the door and shove me after I turned away. Vanessa said I had moved toward her aggressively, forcing her to protect herself. Marianne described the movement as mutual and the fall as accidental. Douglas admitted hearing raised voices and the crash, but his first written account included Marianne's description without clearly identifying it as something she had told him. There was no camera inside the kitchen. No hidden video captured the exact instant of the shove. For my mother, that absence became hope. For Ella, it became pressure. The first message from Vanessa arrived on Ella's phone while I was still in surgery. Vanessa told her that she was frightened and confused and needed Ella not to make the situation worse. The second message was more direct. It said Ella had seen both of us moving and should not use words that made the incident sound intentional. Marianne sent messages too. She reminded Ella that families sometimes said things badly during emergencies and asked her to wait before giving another statement. Ella did not wait. The detective contacted her the following morning because the 911 recording was so specific. She repeated what she had said during the call. I had been leaving. Vanessa had followed, and the shove came after I turned away. When Vanessa learned Ella had spoken again, she changed the pressure from emotional to practical. Ella lived with her. Vanessa paid most of the household expenses and had promised to help with the remaining costs of Ella's nursing program. She told Ella that continuing to accuse her own mother would make living together impossible. She also said she could not support tuition while paying for a lawyer. Ella saved every message. Then she forwarded copies to the detective. Her father, Andrew Mercer, had been divorced from Vanessa for 6 years. He was not a dramatic presence in our family, and he had not always been as consistent as Ella needed. But when she called and said she could no longer remain in Vanessa's house without changing her account, he cleared a room for her that night. He did not tell her what to say. He gave her a key, space for her books and transportation back to the hospital. That was how Ella came to sit beside me. Mara approved the visits because Ella had not threatened my safety and because the clinical team believed a familiar, calm voice might help. Ella did not interrogate me or describe the investigation to a person who could not respond. She read portions of her nursing notes, talked about ordinary weather, and held my hand. She came even when there was no sign I knew she was there. On the 4th day after sedation ended, my eyes moved beneath closed lids when a nurse called my name. On the 6th, one hand flexed without following a command. On the 8th, doctors cautioned Mara that no single movement could predict my long-term recovery. The family wanted certainty for different reasons. Douglas wanted to know whether his daughter would return. Marianne wanted to know whether I would remember. Vanessa wanted to know whether I would speak. Mara asked only what the medical team knew and what remained uncertain. On the night before hospital day 11, Ella sat in the chair beside my bed until visiting hours ended. She told me she had an exam the following week and had not studied enough. She admitted she was frightened of failing and more frightened of passing into a profession built on accurate observation after allowing the most important thing she had ever seen to be rewritten. I did not respond. The next afternoon when she returned, I opened my eyes. Recognition did not restore understanding all at once. I knew Ella's face before I knew why a plastic rail stood between us. I knew she was crying before I understood that the pressure around my skull came from surgery. I knew I wanted to comfort her before I could lift my arm deliberately. When I tried to speak, the effort produced a rough sound that frightened me. Ella pressed the call button. A nurse entered, asked me to look toward her, and held up 2 fingers. I followed the movement. When she told me to squeeze her hand, it took several seconds for my body to translate the instruction into action. The squeeze was weak, but it was purposeful. That became the official point at which the medical record changed from coma to emerging consciousness. For me, the change felt less complete. I drifted in and out. Time folded. Questions appeared faster than language. Mara arrived while I was awake for only a few minutes. She told me where I was, that I had undergone surgery, and that I was safe. She did not tell me 11 days of family conflict in one sitting. The clinical team limited visitors, sound, and complicated information because my brain could not yet tolerate them. Ella gave me the first fact I needed. I saw what happened, she said. I called for help. I closed my eyes, not because I doubted her, but because the memory of the folder and Vanessa's movement flashed without sequence. A handle, cold air, breaking glass, nothing after that. You don't have to remember it all now, Ella said. That was the first gift she gave me after I woke. Permission not to perform certainty for anyone. Over the next several days, information came in pieces small enough for me to hold. I learned first that Ella had identified Vanessa during the 911 call. Then I learned Vanessa had described the shove as self-defense. Mara waited until I could remain alert through a short conversation before explaining that my mother had supported a different version from Ella's. Did she see? I asked. The words emerged slowly. I had to stop between them. Mara did not soften the answer. Ella says she did. That knowledge hurt differently from the impact. Vanessa had acted in panic and anger. It did not excuse her, but I understood the shape of the failure. Marianne's choice lasted longer. She saw her daughter push her other daughter through glass. Then, while I lay unconscious, she decided the family needed a less damaging version. I asked about Douglas. Mara explained that he had not seen the shove. He had repeated Marianne's account without making the source clear. His failure was not identical to hers. It still mattered. Ella told me about the messages only after I had moved out of intensive care. She showed me none of them at first. She summarized what had happened and said she was staying with Andrew. Because of me? I asked. Because Mom made the truth a condition of staying. I wanted to tell her to go home, protect her education, and let the adults absorb the consequences. That response came from the same system that had shaped both of us. I had spent years believing the person most capable of enduring harm should do so quietly to protect everyone else. Ella had already refused that rule. Seeing her first changed everything because her presence answered the question I had not yet been able to ask. The truth had not disappeared when I lost consciousness. Vanessa's own daughter had carried it out of the kitchen into the 911 recording, through the police interview, and past every message asking her to change it. My parents had not protected me. The youngest person in the family had. That realization did not make me feel victorious. It made me grieve. Ella should never have been placed in a position where accurate memory cost her a home with her mother. I should not have needed a 20-year-old witness to defend my reality from the people who raised me, but grief clarified what loyalty had obscured. When the hospital social worker asked whom I wanted permitted to contact me, I approved Mara, Ella, and the clinical team. I said no direct contact from Vanessa. I limited my parents to written communication that Mara could screen until I could process it safely. The social worker asked whether I was certain. I was not certain about my balance, my memory, or whether I would return to work. I was certain that the people who had already spoken over my unconscious body would not control the first decisions I made after waking. Waking up was not the same as recovering. For the first week, sitting upright made the room tilt. Light sharpened the pain behind my right eye. I lost ordinary words midway through sentences and sometimes substituted a related word without noticing. A metal tray dropped outside my room, and the sound sent my heart racing before I understood why. The cuts along my right shoulder and forearm healed faster than the injury no one could see. The surgery left a line near my hairline and an area of tenderness that made washing my hair difficult. I slept in short, irregular stretches and woke unsure whether minutes or hours had passed. After acute hospitalization, I entered inpatient neurological rehabilitation for 5 weeks. My days were divided among physical therapy, occupational therapy, and speech-language work. I practiced walking while turning my head, reading short instructions without losing the sequence, and explaining a task when the correct noun would not come. Progress was measurable and humiliating in equal amounts. Before the injury, I managed payroll systems affecting thousands of employees. In rehabilitation, I needed written steps to make tea safely. Mara never told me to be grateful simply because I survived. She celebrated progress when I wanted it celebrated and allowed frustration to remain frustration. Ella visited around classes and work. She did not become my nurse. The rehabilitation team made that boundary clear, and I protected it. She was my niece, not the person responsible for restoring what her mother had damaged. Memory returned in fragments. I remembered the blue folder pressed against my chest. I remembered Vanessa reaching. I remembered turning away and feeling her hands. The sound of glass arrived most often in dreams. Sometimes I woke convinced I could remember every shard. Other times I doubted whether the pressure on my back was memory or reconstruction from what Ella had told me. A victim advocate helped arrange access to records without overwhelming me. I listened to the 911 call in a quiet room with Mara present. Ella's first description matched the pieces I remembered. The meeting messages showed why I was at the house. Photographs showed the folder outside the door, not in Vanessa's hands. The medical injuries matched a backward fall and exterior impact. None of those records could read Vanessa's mind. They did not need to. They established that I was leaving, that she followed, that Ella saw one deliberate shove, and that my body passed through the glass because of it. The saved messages showed what happened afterward. Vanessa had not merely remembered the movement differently. She had tried to teach Ella a version in which responsibility dissolved into confusion. By the time investigators requested my formal statement, I could sustain a conversation for about 30 minutes before fatigue affected my word retrieval. My rehabilitation physician confirmed that I understood the purpose of the interview and could request breaks. I gave the statement in 2 sessions. I said what I remembered. I identified what I did not remember. I did not borrow Ella's details and present them as my own. The detective asked whether I had moved toward Vanessa before the shove. No, I turned toward the door. Did you touch her? No. Did she push you intentionally? I paused, not because I doubted the physical action, but because the word required precision. She put both hands on me and pushed. I don't know whether she understood what the glass would do. That distinction became part of the record. I did not accuse Vanessa of planning to place me in a coma. I accused her of the act she chose. Marianne sent a letter through Mara 2 days later. She wrote that Vanessa was terrified, that Ella had been influenced by shock, and that a felony could destroy my sister's business and future. She said the family had already suffered enough and asked me to describe the event as a tragic accident. The letter contained several statements of love. None of them included an unqualified acknowledgement that she had watched Vanessa shove me. I did not answer. Douglas made a different choice. He contacted the detective and corrected his original statement. He explained that he had left the kitchen before the shove, heard the crash, and returned afterward. The description of mutual movement came from Marianne, not from anything he personally witnessed. Then he wrote to me. His letter did not ask me to change my account. He admitted that repeating someone else's version had allowed it to sound stronger while I could not speak. He said fear had made him passive, and passivity had helped the wrong person. I read that sentence several times. It did not restore trust. It was the first accurate thing he had offered since the meeting. Douglas also revoked Vanessa's financial access. With help from ordinary bank staff, he changed credentials, placed alerts on the accounts, and documented that he had not authorized the $38,600 as gifts. The incomplete $15,000 application had never been submitted, so it created no debt to unwind. The transferred money remained a separate problem. Because Vanessa had originally been given legitimate account access and my parents preferred repayment to another prosecution, they began working toward a formal civil agreement. I was no longer responsible for drafting it. That mattered almost as much as the account being secured. For years, the family had treated my competence as a reason I should absorb the final task. This time, Douglas used independent help. The documents did not need my signature, my language, or my silence. By the time I left inpatient rehabilitation, I still used a handrail on stairs and required quiet after concentrated conversation. But the medical team agreed I could return to my apartment with outpatient support. Mara drove me home. At the entrance, a delivery driver dropped a bottle in the parking lot. The glass shattered against the pavement. My body stopped before my mind did. Mara waited beside me. She did not pull me forward or tell me there was nothing to fear. When I could move again, I entered my building under my own power. It was not the final door, but it was the first one I crossed after deciding that recovery would belong to me. The criminal case did not resolve when I gave my statement. For several months, it moved at the speed of evidence review, medical updates, and negotiations I could not control. That pace frustrated my mother, who had always believed a family problem became more dangerous the longer it remained open. For me, time served a different purpose. It allowed each account to be tested without requiring the loudest person to win. Vanessa's self-defense claim narrowed under ordinary facts. Ella's 911 call placed the shove after I had turned away. The meeting messages showed that I came to review records, not to start a physical confrontation. The folder's location and the scene photographs supported Ella's description of Vanessa trying to take it as I moved toward the door. Vanessa had no injuries suggesting I attacked her. I had lacerations along my shoulder and arm, a skull fracture, a cerebral contusion, and the subdural hematoma created by a backward impact outside the broken door. Marianne's first account omitted the shove she had seen. Douglas's corrected account removed the appearance of a second witness supporting her. The messages sent to Ella after the assault showed Vanessa trying to replace a direct observation with the language of mutual confusion. No single item solved the case. Together, they left less and less room for the story Vanessa needed. The prosecutor explained the difference between proving an action and pretending to know every thought behind it. The evidence did not show that Vanessa planned the confrontation or intended to put me in a coma. It showed that she intentionally placed both hands on me and used force while an old glass door stood directly behind me. The serious injury followed from that choice. That distinction matched the statement I had given. I did not need to turn Vanessa into someone who entered the kitchen planning to destroy my life. Doing that would have made the story easier to hate and less accurate. Her decision lasted only a moment. Its consequences lasted far longer. My medical records also changed the legal pressure over time. Early estimates could not predict how much function I would regain. Months later, the rehabilitation notes documented both improvement and continuing impairment. They showed that waking on day 11 had not ended the injury. I was still receiving therapy, limiting work, and managing symptoms caused by the impact. Vanessa's attorney questioned whether my incomplete memory weakened the case. The prosecutor answered with the same principle my rehabilitation team had taught me. Limitation was not unreliability. I had been precise about the parts I remembered and equally precise about the parts I knew through records. Ella's account existed before anyone knew whether I would survive, wake, or remember. For once, admitting what I did not know strengthened the truth instead of weakening my position inside the family. Marianne continued writing to me. Her letters changed in tone, but not in purpose. At first, she insisted the police were exaggerating a family accident. Later, she acknowledged Vanessa should not have touched me, but argued that 14 months of my recovery had already punished everyone enough. She measured suffering collectively. My coma, Ella's housing loss, Douglas's humiliation, and Vanessa's legal exposure became one family tragedy with no clear author. I wrote back once. I told her I was not choosing Vanessa's charge, plea, or sentence. I was choosing not to give a false account. The rest followed from what Vanessa had done and what the evidence established. My mother responded that the distinction felt convenient. I did not answer again. Ella faced a harder version of the same pressure. Vanessa called her through her attorney's approved communication channel and said no mother could survive knowing her child had helped send her away. Ella ended the call shaking. She came to my apartment afterward and sat at the kitchen table without removing her coat. "If I had waited before I called," she said, "maybe none of this would have happened. I might have died on that patio, I know. And if you had changed your statement, she still would have pushed me." Ella stared at her hands. "She says I chose you over her. You chose what you saw." I did not tell her the decision should feel easy. Loving Vanessa did not become immoral because Vanessa had harmed me. Ella could miss her mother, grieve the home she lost, and still refuse to lie. That was the difference between a boundary and a demand for allegiance. I did not need Ella to hate Vanessa in order to believe me. The prosecutor eventually presented a negotiated resolution. Vanessa would plead to a reduced felony assault offense. The written factual basis would state that she intentionally placed both hands on me and shoved, causing me to fall through the glass and suffer serious bodily injury. It would not claim she intended the coma, and it would not call the contact accidental. I reviewed the terms with the victim advocate. There was no perfect sentence available. Custody would not return 11 days to me or remove the fear attached to breaking glass. A longer case would not guarantee a different outcome. What mattered most was that the official record would no longer describe the shove as confusion between sisters. Vanessa accepted the plea. At the hearing, she stood beside her attorney and acknowledged the conduct required by the agreement. She did not look at me. I did not need her to. The judge imposed 14 months of custody followed by 3 years of supervised probation. The order continued the prohibition on contacting me, required behavioral treatment, and directed Vanessa to contribute restitution toward the medical and rehabilitation costs my insurance did not cover. The sentence was serious. It was not the destruction my mother had predicted, and it was not a victory that made me feel whole. I had submitted a written impact statement, but I kept it focused on consequences rather than punishment. I described learning to walk without the room shifting, losing words I had used professionally for years, and waking to discover that the family had debated my credibility before I could open my eyes. I did not ask the court to repair my relationships. No sentence could do that. When the terms were announced, I noticed my body searching for a feeling that matched the finality. I expected anger or satisfaction. What came first was exhaustion. For months, appointments, interviews, and family messages had required me to return mentally to the kitchen. The plea meant the official process would stop asking whether the shove happened. It did not mean I would stop hearing glass in my sleep. When the hearing ended, Vanessa was taken through a side door. Marianne watched her leave with both hands pressed together beneath her chin. Douglas sat several seats away from her. Ella cried quietly. I felt relief, grief, and fatigue at the same time. Mara waited with me until the courtroom emptied. She did not ask whether I was happy with the sentence. She asked whether I needed quiet or company. I chose company, and we sat on a bench outside without discussing Vanessa for several minutes. Ella joined us after Andrew spoke with the victim advocate. Her first concern was whether the no-contact order meant she was prohibited from writing to her mother. It did not. The order protected me. It did not decide Ella's relationship for her. I told her the same thing I had said at my kitchen table. She could choose future contact if it was safe and honest. She did not owe me permanent estrangement as proof that she had told the truth. Ella looked relieved and devastated. Those emotions could exist together too. For most of my life, I had imagined accountability as a moment when the truth became so clear that everyone finally agreed. That day taught me otherwise. The truth could become official, while the people who resisted it remained emotionally unchanged. The financial matter ended more quietly. Vanessa signed a documented civil agreement requiring repayment of the $38,600 she had transferred. The unfinished $15,000 application had never been submitted, so there was no additional debt. Douglas and Marianne retained independent assistance for the agreement and kept the new bank safeguards in place. I did not draft a clause, calculate a schedule, or call Vanessa's business creditors. Her repayment was not my project. The absence of that labor felt strange at first. I kept expecting someone to send me a form and explain that only I could finish it correctly. No one did. My relationship settled into forms none of us would have chosen before the assault. I maintained no contact with Vanessa. The court order enforced the boundary, but the decision existed independently of it. Nothing she said during the case showed that contact would be safe or honest. Ella remained with Andrew until she moved into shared student housing closer to her nursing program. She paid more of her own expenses, applied for aid, and worked weekend shifts. I helped her understand forms when she asked, but I did not replace every dollar Vanessa withdrew. Independence built through a new dependency would not have freed either of us. Douglas and I began speaking once every 2 weeks. The calls were scheduled and short. He gave me information without asking me to resolve it. When he apologized, he did not follow the apology with a request for forgiveness. Marianne and I communicated only in writing. She continued to say she loved me. I believed she did. I also believed love that repeatedly required me to deny danger was not enough for access. My parents remained married. Douglas's corrected statement did not turn him into a different man, and Marianne's alignment with Vanessa did not end their decades together. But the old arrangement, Marianne defining the conflict and Douglas confirming her version, no longer operated without resistance. The family survived. It simply could not survive in the shape my mother had been trying to preserve. My outpatient rehabilitation continued long after the court file stopped generating new dates. I returned to work gradually. At first, I managed short blocks from home with written checklists and no unscheduled meetings. Concentrated reading caused headaches. A crowded video call could exhaust me for the rest of the day. When a word disappeared, I learned to pause instead of filling the silence with an apology. My employer increased my hours only as my stamina improved. By the end of the first year, I was again handling complex payroll systems, but I worked differently. I documented more, scheduled recovery time, and stopped treating exhaustion as proof of commitment. The first time I completed a difficult system reconciliation without someone checking each step, I closed the file and sat still for several minutes. Before the injury, I would have moved immediately to the next problem. Afterward, competence felt less like an obligation and more like something I had rebuilt. I also learned to disclose a limit before it became a failure. If a meeting ran too long, I asked for a break. If competing voices made it hard to process information, I requested written follow-up. None of those accommodations made me less capable. They prevented me from repeating the old habit of hiding strain until someone else benefited from it. Some symptoms remained. I still experienced headaches after long days. My balance became unreliable when I was overtired. Sudden impact sounds could pull me back toward the patio before I had time to identify the room around me. The scar near my hairline faded, but did not disappear. Recovery did not return me to the woman who entered my parents' kitchen with a blue folder. It taught me that she had been carrying too much before Vanessa ever touched her. As my capacity returned, Mara stepped out of the daily decision-making role as carefully as she had entered it. She remained my healthcare proxy on paper and my friend in practice, but she stopped screening my mail and accompanying me to appointments when I no longer needed her there. She never treated my independence as ingratitude. That made accepting her help easier than accepting help had ever been inside my family. Months after the case closed, investigators returned the blue accordion folder. The plastic cover was scratched. A dark stain remained near one corner, even after evidence staff sealed the original exterior photographs. I reviewed the contents once. Then I placed the folder in a storage box with the court records and medical documents. I did not throw it away, and I did not keep it on my desk. The truth was preserved. I did not have to carry it every day. Douglas visited my apartment twice during the second year. Both visits were arranged in advance. He brought no forms, unpaid notices, or requests for me to speak to Marianne. We drank coffee, talked about his cardiac checkups, and sat through several silences he once would have rushed to fill with someone else's explanation. Our relationship did not return to what it had been. It became smaller and more accurate. Marianne sent a birthday card. She wrote that she hoped time would soften everything. I did not respond to the suggestion. Time had softened the scar and reduced the headaches. It had not changed who saw the shove or who tried to conceal it. Ella and I remained close without organizing our lives around the assault. We spoke about her clinical rotations, difficult exams, and the fear she felt the first time a patient's family disagreed about what had happened. She became more precise, not less compassionate. "People think accuracy is cold," she told me once. I understood why the sentence stayed with her. 18 months after Vanessa pushed me, Ella completed her nursing program. The pinning ceremony took place in a community college auditorium filled with folding programs, nervous families, and graduates adjusting white collars beneath their gowns. I sat near the aisle because bright lights and crowded rows could still make me tired. Andrew sat several seats away. Mara joined me. Douglas did not attend, and Marianne was not invited. Their absence was not announced or turned into a public judgment. The day belonged to Ella. When her name was called, she crossed the stage with her head upright. The instructor fastened the nursing pin near her shoulder. Ella looked into the audience, found us, and smiled through tears. I felt proud of what she had completed. I also felt the shape of everything it had cost her to reach that stage without her mother beside her. Both feelings were true. After the ceremony, we waited for the crowd to thin. Ella carried her certificate against her chest, while Mara and Andrew walked ahead toward the parking lot. The lobby exit was a wide glass door. I saw it before we reached it. For an instant, my body remembered the old aluminum frame, rain on flagstone, and the force of hands behind me. My steps slowed. Ella noticed. She did not grab my arm. She did not move in front of me or tell me the door was safe. She stood beside me and waited. In the glass, I saw our reflections together. Ella wore her nursing pin. The scar near my hairline was visible where I had tucked back my hair. The first glass door had been a boundary Vanessa forced me through. This one was clear. I could see what waited on the other side. I could decide when to move. I placed my hand on the push bar. The door opened beneath my own weight. Ella stayed beside me as I crossed through it by choice.